to be about support when you lose a loved one. So there's a couple of shows that we're doing this morning. There's my show and there's a show just after mine, which is about Islamic wills. The topics seem a little bit morbid, but these are topics that need to be discussed. So in the studio with me today, I have Brother Sulaiman Nagdi.
Assalamu alaikum to our listeners.
And hopefully joining a little bit later on Zoom will be a sister called Sabiha Bhatti. Brother Sulaiman Nagdi is from the Muslim Burial Council of Leicestershire, and he'll say a little bit more about himself in a moment. And Sabiha Bhatti is from the Muslim Bereavement Support Service. She's based in London. She's also part of a Ghusl workshop team, but as I said, she'll be joining us a little bit later. So focusing on Brother Sulaiman, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Jazakallah. First of all, I'm grateful for being given an opportunity to come to the radio station. The subject matter that we're going to discuss today is one that I appreciate may bring back memories for people that have lost a loved one recently. And as a result of that, I apologize. But it is important that we discuss some of these important subjects. As they always say, there's two things definite in life, taxes and death, and these two things can never be avoided. I've been involved in the field of death and bereavement for 28 to 30 years now, and we formed the first Muslim Burial Council 28 years ago. And this was as a result of service provisions for the Muslim community. At that point, if I take people back, we had difficulty in relation to burials on Saturday, Sunday, and bank holidays. So the only slots that were given to us was from Monday to Friday, and Saturday and Sunday the bodies were held at the mortuary, at the mosque, or at the hospital, and at places like Old People's Home, and especially at time of holidays, etc., we had difficulties 3 or 4 days when issues gave rise to this. So it was as a result of that we thought we had to form, and we were the first ones in Europe signed a historic document with the local authority, Leicester City Council, to permit Muslims and part of course, the Jewish community who have similar needs to bury the deceased 7 days a week throughout the year.
So is that what, so obviously, is this what the organisation is? So when we talk about the Muslim Burial Council of Leicestershire, is this what it is? How would you describe the organisation?
It places two roles. One, it's an advocacy organisation, and secondly, of course, it provides the very physical hands-on work that we do of collecting a body, sending it down to one of the masajid, the choice of the family, ghusl, transportation, etc. But that's a tiny cog of the work that we're involved in, because we soon realized that once we were given the permission, we had to then have body release. 80% of all deaths take place in an institution like a hospital or people's home. And so we had to negotiate with the NHS Trust for body release on a Saturday, Sunday bank holiday. And of course, every person that passes away has to be registered through the registrar's office. So we had to enter separate negotiation with the superintendent registrar to allow window openings on weekends and holidays to try and accommodate this. Following on from there, we also realized that there are those deaths that take place outside home, and it could be of a criminal nature, example, suicide or traffic accident. And so we started a whole lot of training for police liaison officers, because they are involved, talking to the coroner for body releases, etc. So there's a wide range of issues. Of course, there's other issues that maybe is not for today's discussion, but issues that we have to consider around stem cell, or around organ donation, etc.
We did have a show. We had a show about that kind of last week. So some of our listeners can always go back to our YouTube. Our YouTube, and have a look at that. So those were the particular topics that we discussed, so inshallah. Sorry, I interrupted. You were talking about what it is you do.
That basically was and then what we realized that there were needs nationally, and so we took tours to different cities up and down the country, and instead of reinventing the wheel, to share good practice, what we already had in place and how it worked. So I've traveled personally up and down the UK at various cities where there's a majority Muslim community, and as a result, they have also done their work. I've also traveled in far as the European Union, speaking to different European countries and Muslims there. The last one being in Norway, where the city planner and some of the city mayor came down, looked at the facilities that we have, And as a result of their trip here, they, after 40 odd years as the Muslims have been in Norway, where bodies were repatriated back home, they had a Muslim cemetery there. So the impact has been far greater than one would expect.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So, I mean, one of the questions here is, are you a member of the National Burial Council? So you're going to have to explain to the listeners what the National Burial Council is. And then what are the common challenges and challenges more specific to Leicestershire? So obviously you've talked about how you work not just in Leicestershire, but obviously, you know, you've got a kind of network that you're supporting Muslim communities in particular up and down the country. So the two questions are, you know, what is a National Burial Council? How's that different to the Muslim Burial Council, and also kind of challenges that you may face?
Okay, the National Burial Council was actually formed here in Leicester at De Montfort University. Ambikos was there at its inception, and we believed that we needed a federal body to cover the whole of the United Kingdom, because whatever we had in place here and the future challenges that we were going to face, which I'm sure we will talk going forward, would need to be addressed at a national level. And as a result of this, we formed the National Burial Council, and every year we've had a conference that covers the whole country. And it is at a time when people reflect, talk about their difficulties, and some of those things we will cover later. And Ambikos is as advisor to the National Burial Council. So yes, we are part of the National Burial Council. It came more prominent recently as a result of the COVID crisis, but we still continue to work because there is other difficulties and challenges going forward around death certification, the coroner's reform bill, etc. And these need more policy advisory roles as opposed to the hands-on work that most people are accustomed to when they lose a loved one.
Yeah, it does sound very technical. I mean, you've mentioned the pandemic already. What were some of the challenges that you faced? You know, at the start of the pandemic, when you didn't really know what was going on, and it was all a bit confusing for everybody.
Okay, well, I have two particular roles. I have a role, of course, with the Muslim Burial Council, Ambikos for short, and the FMO, the Federation of Muslim Organization, which I'm the elected PR officer for. The Federation themselves called up a meeting in Leicester, and we had about 200 members of masajid, imams and committee members, because at this point we were not sure exactly what the pandemic was all about. Pandemics have always come and gone, but this time it was unusual because there was no sort of guidance from government. And the immediate fear that we had, and the fear that was expressed to us by government, was in relation to body release. Possibly ghusl cannot be undertaken, etc. The disease could be airborne, and therefore if the body bag is opened at any given time, then the people that actually provide the services from the community would themselves be in danger. We looked at the situation around the masajid because we as Ambikos do not provide ghusl facilities as such. We facilitate and help people and point them and signpost them to the various masajids that do this work. And we felt that most of the people that do this work are the elders in our community, people who are possibly vulnerable, may have certain underlying health conditions. So very quickly we set about and we managed to secure about 140, 160 young men and women to sort of take the role and ask the elders to sort of step back and give them the protection, build a sort of wall around them. And that started. What I actually did at that particular point also was, because we are a non-sectarian body, we encompass all Muslim organizations irrespective of the background that they come from. As a result of this, I contacted some of the Islamic jurists to find out what the position was in relation to an individual being buried without a ghusl, or was ghusl an absolute requirement. And the views varied, but by and large, the vast majority of people were of an acceptance. These are Islamic jurists, that if it came to a point where there was a danger to society, then water should just be thrown on the bag outside. So it wasn't actually the washing of the body, it was the ritual of the washing that should be undertaken, and the body should then be buried without anybody actually having a look. But as we progressed and we started finding out that PPE itself was an aid that helped people, and there was a voluntary group that was set up, we could not be part and parcel of active of that voluntary group. The reason being because our insurance would not cover us for volunteers and individuals. Therefore, what we did was we provided some of the PPE equipment. I, in turn, worked with the Department of Health and Ministry of Justice to look at issues around the legality of some of these issues and how we undertake this work. And alhamdulillah, the volunteers at work did sterling work. They went out of the way, and they really went that extra mile. And alhamdulillah, it so happened that as we started learning more about the particular disease in hand, we realized that with minimal massaging of the body, when it's actually washed, etc., if the face of the individual or the mouth is covered, then it may not become airborne. And as a result of that, ghusl was possible, though very gently and very carefully, and was only done by no more than half a dozen people. Bodies traditionally were always taken home to families, but that was not allowed. There was a restriction to how many people can actually attend a funeral, which was quite challenging. And we have an app at Ambikos which we normally notify people of funerals that take place, but that had to stop because families were also fearful that people would come home and the disease would be brought there. So as a result of that, it was managed, but it was managed as a collective effort of the community. For no second would I want to take claim that Ambikos was in the forefront. I think it was the du'as of our elders and all the volunteers all together. It was a joint effort. People did different things at different times. And alhamdulillah, we managed to overcome the worst situation.
Absolutely. And I do remember being sent a volunteer form at the time. And, may Allah reward all those volunteers that took place, because there were so many of them. And as you said, you put them into groups, you put them into kind of shifts so that they could do what they were doing. You did mention that you don't organize the kind of ghusls, but the masajid do. Do you want to, before I ask the question, I was just going to say, those people who've just tuned in, I'm with Brother Sulaiman Nagdi here in the studio, and our topic today is support when you lose a loved one. So we're kind of talking about, what it is that you can do when you lose a loved one, what support that's in place, and he's been talking to us about the Muslim Burial Council of Leicestershire. The question I was going to ask you is, you mentioned that there are ghusl khanas in, that you don't necessarily run them, but they're located in the community. Do you want to tell the listeners where they might find them, where they might find the help?
Sure. All masjids are funeral arrangers, but they themselves do not necessarily have the facilities. So if I mention two of the largest ones that we use in the city, one is at Jame Mosque, which has a very large mortuary, and the other one is Central Mosque. But there are smaller ones that exist. Masjid-e-Noor has one, out in Oadby in Wixton, MKA has one, the Shia community have their own as well. And as a result of possibly half a dozen that are actively involved, one way or another, they can get access to these. Now, it is important that we stress that as soon as somebody passes away and gives us a call, the choice of where they want their loved ones to be washed, shrouded, etc., is that of the family. So we ask them, where would they like this to be conducted? And as a result of their wishes, we will then point them in the appropriate direction. So ours is more of signposting them to the institution, not promoting one over the other.
No. Is it normal for you to be the first persons to be contacted, or do individuals usually go to the masajid themselves anyway?
It's both. The people who are musallis of a particular masjid would go there. These masjids have been providing funeral services for a long time. We are not in competition with anybody. We are basically an umbrella body. So if the masajid feel that they can deal with a particular situation, then they would help. Other masajids would simply ring us and tell us, can you take over? We have a system in place where all the ones that do the ghusl, etc., are part of a WhatsApp group, and we don't want to step on anybody's foot. So what we do is, as soon as a funeral is announced and somebody has contacted a funeral arranger, they put it on the group chat, and then nobody else interferes. We let them continue with that. And the reason for that is you can have a lot of confusion where different people act, and this is a difficulty not in relation to also funeral arrangers acting, but family members. So everybody knows an uncle or somebody better who can do things differently, and it causes more confusion. So we try to streamline it and leave it in a more professional manner. And so we'll simply say that, have you contacted a funeral arranger? We've just seen on our text message that you allocated this particular funeral to be conducted by X, Y, and Z, and as a result of that, we refer them back to that place. choice. Unless the family wishes to change, then it's up to them to tell that funeral arranger that we are now moving to a second funeral arranger as a result of that. But there are two aspects of this that we must be bear in mind. Most funeral arrangers' jobs are after what we call a green form, which is a registration given by the registrar to give you permission to bury your deceased, or a burial order from the coroner. This is the first stepping stone. Without this, you cannot proceed with the burial. Ambikos is also involved pre-paperwork. So there are many cases where there's end of life, where people can't find the GP, the hospital release. Sometimes there are difficulties and there are possibly not enough staff at the hospital, pathologists and radiologists, etc., or the coroner's department is very busy, etc., and people need some sort of support before this paperwork is issued. That is where Ambikos normally kicks in. So we are there pre-paperwork and post-paperwork.
Right. So basically, if there was, say for example, there was a death in the home, would it be appropriate, sensible to contact you for advice, what to do, how to move forward? Are you in a position to give that advice?
Yes, we are. And there are possibly, I think, about 20% of people still pass away at home. Now, there are different types of death that take place at home. One is a suspicious or sudden death. And as a result of that, the coroner would always be involved. And people need to understand why the coroner, in our case, Kathy Mason, is I would say, the same powers as a High Court judge.
Right.
And sometimes people try to use members of parliament, councillors, etc., to put political pressure for the release of bodies, and that will not work because the judiciary is independent of political pressure. And people need to understand this, that the coroner works independent of any pressure. It's a crown appointment. They may be paid by the local authority, but the appointment is, of course, by the crown from the state, from the government. Now, in cases like those, we have to be careful as to how far we intervene.
Right.
We will send in emails, we will negotiate and try and look. And they are very helpful in Leicester. In fact, Leicester, I would say, has one of the better relations with its coroner compared to the rest of the country.
Okay, mashallah.
We used to have a part-time coroner, and we lobbied for a full-time coroner in Leicester, and the workload for that coroner has now increased because we had a city coroner and we had Northwest Leicestershire coroner. The Northwest Leicester coroner has retired, and as a result, that workload has come to the existing coroner. So she has more to do. Now, she, of course, came from a nursing background, and so I would say from a caring background, and she's extremely understanding in how she works. And the jurisdiction of every county is different. So a coroner in Leicester, example, will be different to Nottingham, to Birmingham, etc. And a lot depends on your relation and working relation with this particular individual. Our coroner, I would say, has managed to reduce postmortems by about 42%.
Wow, okay.
And this is directly as a result of the different ways of how she works. There's a tendency for most doctors and family GPs, even hospital doctors and consultants, that following the case that happened many years ago with Shipman, there's a tendency of using the path of least resistance. So whenever they are unsure of a death, they just refer it to the coroner. So what the coroner then turns around and says, well, look, go through your medical records, see what you think the probable cause is, and I'm happy to work with you. So she goes that extra mile to make the doctors work that bit more harder, and therefore she's reduced that. That's one thing she's done. And the second thing she's done, which is very different to the rest of the country, is that there's something called virtual autopsy, which is MRI CT scanning.
I've heard about this, yeah.
And the scanning process is how you determine cause of death through a scan, mostly CT, very rare MRI. The success rate, the early results from university studies, both in the Netherlands and in Manchester, was about 83-84%. So it's never been 100%. No. There's some trauma cases, etc., that cannot be determined, and also children whose scans been taken may take a bit longer to have specialists to actually read the scan. So that has resulted in other parts of the country creating what they call a paid service. So, example, you do a head scan and you pay £250, and there's chest scan, and so you go through the body. you may spend £1,000, still not get a result, and still end up as the traditional autopsy that will take place. Now, there was a call from the community in Leicester that why don't we have a scanning process here? And we took a different approach to the rest of the country in the sense that we did not want a two-tier system where those that had money would go for a scan and those that had none wouldn't have. So we continued lobbying our coroner on this particular issue, and finally she agreed that any scan that is done in Leicester will come out from her budget, so there's no cost to the family members. And that patience and continuous perseverance with her has resulted in something that is different in Leicester compared to the other parts of the country. So there are certain things that happen in Leicester which are unique and different, and hence we go back to the original argument, why do we need a National Burial Council? We need to share good practice with each other, and Muslims up and down the country can inshallah benefit from this.
Oh, absolutely, and what you're describing is obviously the least stressful method for the families as well, who've then got to deal with the bereavement. So there's a couple of questions. I mean, I'm conscious that we have got Sabiha, inshallah, who's going to be joining us soon. So there's a couple of things I want to ask you. The questions are, is there a cost for the service of Ambikos? So obviously you provide a service. Do you charge for that? Are you funded in some way? And also, what next for you? What next for your organisation?
Okay. Initially, we were the delegated authority to provide out-of-hours burial service. So we used to get traditionally a grant from the local authority. What then happened as years went past, because of the EU directive, they said that it has to be tendered out. And for the last sort of 2 or 3 tenders, we have been successful. It's an open tender that goes out to the community. And there was a general feeling of most of the masajids and at our AGM that Ambikos should still continue with that. Now, what that enabled us to do was the money that came in paid for a worker at the office and paid for the overheads, so the rent, the gas, and the electricity. What then happened after that is, as a result of that revenue coming in, we then could do all the other charitable work, because we are not paid for any of the other work that I've just mentioned to you.
Right. So it's more of a charitable organisation.
Exactly. So that's supported, and Ambikos is a charity. And everybody worked fi sabilillah. Unfortunately, at the last one around October last year, we lost a tender and somebody else got the tender. And as a result of that, we do not have any money coming in. Now, we've had a number of AGM and meetings with members of the community massages, and the overall feeling is Ambikos should still continue because it's been around household name for 30 odd years. Maybe they need to look at a different funding stream, maybe fundraising, maybe massages, maybe an affiliation fee or something of that nature. So at the moment, we are surviving on our reserves that we have. And we'll see how we move forward. And we need to be self-sufficient. Now, what is future for Ambikos? Ambikos, I think, needs to spend more time. Besides this, the important work that people are involved in relation to when somebody passes away, the physical work of actually arranging the funeral, all new challenges that are coming forward. So as an example, if I bring you one that is coming and it's already in the pipeline, is what we call a medical examiner. What's happened after herald shipment and death certification, a person who passes away as a result of whatever cause and the body is to be cremated, there's always 2 doctors' signatures on the form. But for burial, MCCD, the medical cause of death certificate, is issued by a doctor who has seen the last patient, some say 14, up to 28 days in the illness. Now, they physically would have to have seen this person. And this is a good time that I tell people that if you have an elderly person at home or anyone who's ill, try and make sure that at least you see the doctor regularly. So when they call them, also, if it's end of life, you take them away from hospital to bring them home, and which is a choice of the family, we need to consider 2 or 3 things. One of the things we need to consider that if the person is taken away at the end of a week, then the chances are the weekend will kick in, and it'll be very hard to find the staff or a doctor to do so. So it may be better to wait, example, till Monday. It may also be a good idea that you get in touch with your family GP to say your loved ones at home, they're at end of life care, they have been managed there. If they can at least come down or at least do a video calling, so they've seen the person, and try and get some sort of communication open between the family GP and the family. So what will happen is when death does take place, there's a tendency of people ringing 999 or 11. We can understand, exactly.
Yeah.
And their job, of course, is that they have an agreement with a co-op that removes a body back to the Leicester Royal Infirmary pending the decision of the coroner. But in many cases, the coroner is happy for Ambikos to take the body over, provided we do not do ghusl or anything until the go-ahead is given, because it may be of a criminal nature. And we ask people to be mindful that at a time like this, your best friend is your family GP. Stay in contact with the family GP. Let the family GP know. Tell the family GP that you'll only contact them at a reasonable hour. There's no point ringing the family GP at 1 o'clock in the morning, when somebody's passed away. The doctor can't do anything.
Right.
So wait until the morning. There's nothing to panic about. Wait until that particular point and then contact the family GP. Once the family GP comes and gives you the medical cause of death certificate, things move from there. Until then, nothing happens. But what people get confused is when the paramedics come and they find that a person has passed away, they say, we've got a death certificate. It's not a death certificate. It simply says life is extinct. It's not the cause of death.
No.
So it simply says the person is no longer with us. That is all the certificate says. And that is not good enough. So we need to understand that we need the medical cause of death, which is issued either in the hospital by the consultant or the team or somebody who's seen the patient. And the second thing that we need to understand also is the confusion normally takes place when a lot of people then, if the body example is taken under the care of the coroner, will continuously ring the coroner's department
to try and get an
outcome and an update. And what they don't realize is we are making things difficult. Remember, in law, everybody has to be treated equally, and there is a time, but they are very sensitive to the needs of the Muslim community, and wherever possible, they will accommodate us first, as well as the hospital, body releases, etc. So we need to be grateful. It is not the only death they're looking at. There are many other deaths that have taken place, and we need to wait our turn. But in most cases, as soon as they know it's a Muslim or Muslim-sounding name, they actually pull all the stops out to try to combat. And we have to be grateful for this. So I think I would ask people to exercise some sort of patience sabr at a time like that, because it is very important.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, that's really, really helpful. And I was going to say, there's a lovely message that's come in, and it says, my hat's off to the whole Ambikos team who've done miraculous work, mashallah, especially through the most challenging times in the pandemic, and may Allah reward Uncle Suleiman for his team. May you and your team be rewarded. And that's from Aisha, who was on a show earlier in the week. Now, I am going to just check if our guest from London is with us. Safiya, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, Safiya. I introduced you a little bit earlier, but I want you to tell the listeners who you are, because obviously you're part of the Muslim Bereavement Support Service, but you're not local. So I guess what I would like you to do is say a little bit about who you are, but obviously because we're kind of broadcasting from Leicester, I know there are listeners from up and down the country and kind of internationally as well, but I want to kind of know what it is you offer and how you can support our listeners.
Sure. So I'm on the management committee for the Muslim Bereavement and Support Service, and MBSS is a charity that was set up in 2012, and we support sisters emotionally that have had a loss of a loved one through to death. So we'll support them on a one-to-one basis. Fi sabilillah, we're all volunteers. We do not charge. It's a confidential service. And it's an Islamic service. So basically we support sisters using the Quran, Hadith, Sunnah, and hopefully reaches a state of solace with them and give them peace and comfort. And as I mentioned, it's a one-to-one service, but sisters can meet other sisters that are also bereaved via our online group sessions as well, or face-to-face group sessions.
Okay, can I just say, I mean, you've mentioned sisters a lot. Because you're obviously, your organisation says Muslim Bereavement Support Service. Do you support men? Do you support our brothers, or do you just support the ladies in the community?
Well, we have about 35 volunteers, and all our volunteers are female. So in this situation, it wouldn't be appropriate for females to be supporting brothers, because as you can understand, we build up quite a strong relationship with the sisters that we're supporting. I mean, we'll end up talking to them every week, quite often for 6, 8, 10 sessions sometimes, and sometimes the sessions go on to even more. But we totally recognise that men, our brothers, our dear brothers, need to be supported. And quite often they're the ones that are trying to keep it together. They're the ones that are putting on a brave face, and quite often they're crumbling inside. So MBSS does not support brothers. However, we signpost them on to an amazing imam at the Gardens of Peace Cemetery, because MBSS is part of Gardens of Peace Muslim Cemetery in Hainault in London. And we signpost all the brothers onto the imams there, and they would support any brothers.
Okay. I mean, Brother Suleiman, do we offer anything like that in Leicester here?
We don't. It's an issue that we've discussed a number of times. The difficulty that we have is we've looked at the situation and said that, of course, it's much needed. I would think in some cases, though the sister says brothers need it, I think sisters need it. That's slightly bit more support. And the reason I would say that by virtue of the fact that there's an iddat period that a woman will have to sit through.
4 months, 10 days.
And that alone would cause many other challenges to the sister. However, we feel that, and I don't know, in this case, I'm not speaking in relation to the operation in London, but we believe that we need professional people, because sometimes possibly more harm can be done than good, because people do not have a structure as to how they deal with individuals, maybe get emotional about the situation. And there's nothing wrong with being emotional as long as it does not impact on the individual. So we are looking at this as the next, in fact, we look at the next phase of actually having a centralized place for the Muslim Burial Council, where it's a one-stop shop. So what would happen is, if somebody passes away, they ring one number and that person takes over everything,
it's all managed.
Including the counseling side, including in some cases people have visitors that come from up and down the country. People live in a two-up-two-town terrace house. They can't accommodate them. There is place where the weather is not on their side, so they need a place to sit. Some would like to provide meals for the visitors to come in, so we need a seating area, segregate, of course, for sisters and brothers and all of this. Postmortems, inshallah, if it can be carried out within our controlled environment, is very important. And I say this by virtue of the fact that I have seen our sisters who are totally covered with niqab, hijab, etc., and have covered themselves for the whole of their life. It's unfortunate that the situation arises is when they go to the state-owned individual mortuaries, the bodies are not modestly covered, when the postmortem is taken place, etc. So I think that we need a place of our own where all of these, including tissue samples, if they are retained and given back to the family after these samples have been looked at, etc., is a much needed service. So I think we need to move into the next stage, and the next stage would be we need a professional setup where people, it should still be a charity, but where people will just ring one simple number and everything that we can possibly think of is available there.
And is that what you're working towards?
Exactly, that's what we're working towards. It's something that we've looked at a number of times, but you can only move at the pace of our community. And unfortunately, we need more visionaries in the community to take things forward, which will happen, inshallah.
Inshallah. I mean, that, before I go back to Safiya, one of the things that I've said in a couple of shows that I've presented or I've been a guest at is that those young people who are listening, they need to get involved. Brother Suleiman Nagdi is talking about how he has this vision, or the group have this vision, but the vision can only be implemented if there is a team in place to make it happen. So if this is something you might be interested in, please do be in touch with us. Going back to Safiya, one of the things that you've said, obviously, that you support women. Now, obviously, on our website, on our Instagram page, we've put something up, but can you tell us where the sisters can find support, and also sisters who are obviously not London based, how can they find out where you are, and how can they access the services that you offer?
Sure. So basically, our service is national, and we, we do support sisters in all different cities, and actually, sisters come to us from abroad as well, because we're quite a unique service. There's not very many organisations out there that provide free Islamic bereavement support, and like the brother said, it's very important to make sure you've got the right people doing this, because you could cause a lot of damage. Because it's a very emotional, very sensitive time. So anything that we say to the sisters, it could be taken in the wrong way. It could be, it could do more damage than good. So all our volunteers are trained, and they are trained, and they have a lot of top-up training. They have a lot of Islamic bereavement training, as well as secular bereavement training as well from external organisations. So if sisters in Leicester, and we have supported sisters, as I mentioned, up and down the country, would like support, our service is open to all of you as well. Of course, you're our sisters. We want to support you as well, and you can get in touch with us via different means. So, for example, you could email us. The email address is info@mbss.org.uk. You can get in touch via our phone. The office number is 0203 468 7333. You can look onto our website, www.mbss.org.uk. You can find us on Instagram. Search for the Muslim Bereavement Service, Support Service, and you'll find us there as well. So, it's a service open to everybody. And, alhamdulillah, so far we've supported over 600 sisters, nationally, internationally, sisters that have lost somebody to death, to suicide sometimes, to murder, sisters that have had stillbirths, sisters that have lost adult children, any sort of loss of any sort of death that they've lost their loved one to, they can come to us for support. If we are not the right people, then we will signpost you on. So, for example, if somebody is feeling suicidal themselves because they've lost somebody dear to them and they just can't cope, they just can't carry on with life, we are not the right people to be supporting you. So in that case, we don't want to leave you in the lurch. We will signpost you on to the relevant organisations that can support you the best. And it's about getting the right support. It doesn't matter who does the support, gives the support, but it's about the right support for that person that comes to us.
Okay. No, that's really helpful. One of the other things, and this is kind of to both of you really, one of the things that you offer, Sister, is that you offer your team, I guess, you do a ghusl workshop and you travel up and down the country to offer that, but also to you, Brother Suleiman, because obviously, you mentioned earlier in the show that during the pandemic, there were lots of volunteers who came forward and helped out. I have been involved in one ghusl in my time, but I know that this is something that we should all be aware of. So first to you, Brother Suleiman, what do we offer in Leicester, and then obviously Sister Sabiha?
Okay, there is, at the local level, we do have occasional workshops for both brothers and sisters around how to perform ghusl. We have basically a dummy and some fabric cut up and show people how to actually conduct the actual ghusl, etc. So that happens at the very local level. Some of the dal rooms do send the students down and we do work with them. So that's for the community side. Outside the community, I personally do chaplaincy training at Markfield for chaplains nationally and at Muslim College, Cambridge, to speak to our young scholars, imams and alimas to understand about civic life and their role, because without the context it's very difficult. I also do work with the Royal College of Medicine. We have spoken of end-of-life care. I do work with Loros, the hospice in Leicester, and Rainbow Hospices, and also work with third-year medical students to get them to understand the needs of our community. So there is various projects that are running at the same time to try and educate authorities and people that are involved in this. So there is the local, which is the very, I wouldn't say basic. I have done a number of talks in masajids up and down in the masjids in Leicester to try to tell people. We do a book. In fact, I presented one earlier to you, working on 8 faiths and no faiths, and used by medical practitioners up and down the country, was used by the National Resilience Force at the time of the pandemic, has been used in faraway places. So I have spoken on issues of MRI scanning as far as away as Brisbane, Australia, in South Africa, Georgetown in Washington, further up here. But these are policy issues of a bigger nature.
Absolutely. I was going to say more than kind of policy issues and talking quite global and international. Do you think that, and I'm taking it right back now to kind of local level, do you think it's important for our listeners to know how to do a ghusl? Do you think it's important for our listeners to get the training? Do you think they should be getting involved, or should they just assume that somebody will be there to do the ghusl when they need that service?
No, it's absolutely vital that they all get involved. The reason for that is the Muslim community per se does not have professional undertakers or companies that do this. It's a very community-oriented service that we provide. And it provides the next generation of people to try and understand. And volunteering is very rewarding. Ask me, I've been volunteering on various issues for 40 odd years. And just to see a smile or see something happen to somebody who is of a beneficial nature is rewarding to yourself. But it is not the thanks that we are looking for, because whatever we do, the reward lies with the Almighty. But it's a good feeling. So I would say to people, please involve yourself in whatever role you can. If you find that the ghusl itself is not for you, there could be it could be support. It could be a sister who's lost a husband sitting at home, as you said, through either period. If they pop in and say, can I do the shopping? Can I pick up the children? It's all service. Service to us, we must extend it to, besides what is important, which are our ritual prayers, etc., to serve humanity is part and parcel of our faith. It should just come naturally, and it does come naturally to us. So let's just work on it a bit harder and do whatever little we can. It could be that you're an academic. You could write papers on the stuff. You could help doctors and nurses. At the moment, we are trying to form a database where we can get hold of doctors out of hours, if we can, a central point. They can work on that. There's apps and other issues. I have been working with somebody in South Africa who wants to map out, it's a long shot, of all the cemeteries worldwide, where you would simply put the name in a database of a particular city, and you'll get the grave number of that individual. And while I'm talking about graves, there's a shortage of land. As you know, land is premium. And in the city, we hope that the present land will last until possibly 2025.
Wow, okay, so only a couple of years.
So we are doing two things. One, I have already embarked on looking for private land for the Muslim community in negotiation with the Leicester City Council to say the land is filling up what they're doing. They are looking at a few sites. Some have been discarded because they're parks, etc. It may be difficult. We may not get a place in the city, but we may have to move out to the county. So we need to look at that. But until that comes in, because there's various tests they've got to do, the water table, etc. It's very technical in relation. It takes about 2 or 3 years to accept the planning permission to go through. So from 2015, we've had what we call double-depth graves in Leicester.
I've heard about this.
So one person is buried, say, example, at 8 foot, and then the same grave can be used by a loved one at 6 foot. And from 2015, there are many graves at Sefton Hill Cemetery, which I would encourage our listenership that if they do have a loved one there and another loved one, a member of the family who they feel comfortable can be buried there, please do so, because what we're doing is we're preserving whatever land we have until a new cemetery comes on board.
Become available. Right, I was going to say, that's fascinating, and we've got about 2 minutes left of this show. So in the last couple of minutes, I want to, Safiya, is there any kind of last things that you want? I mean, we've got less than a minute now. Is there any last things that you want to say?
Yes, I mean, I would say that MBSS is also involved with chaplains as well. We go in as volunteer chaplains into the local hospitals and support Muslim patients, and we comfort them and comfort their families as well. We also support social workers, midwives. They come to us and say, look, can you please train us or give us some guidelines as to how we should be treating Muslim patients that are coming to us. We go into various hospices as well. And again, we train palliative care nurses. So we do run lots of different workshops helps to people that really want to know about how they should be liaising with Muslim families at the time of death.
That's lovely. Okay.
I would just say,
I was going to say, sister,
anyone...
I'm gonna have to cut you short because I've literally got a minute, and I just want some final words from Brother Suleiman before I wrap the show up. So I am sorry to cut you off there, brother. Is there any? You've got less than a minute. Is there anything that you'd like to say?
Very simply, thank you to the sister from London. She's from Gardens of Peace. Mohammed Umar works with the Gardens of Peace, and he's the chair of the National Ballot Council. But what I would like to ask people is very simply that as we're moving forward, there are new challenges we're going to face. There are going to be greater delays. Deaths that take place in hospitals will have the signature of a medical examiner. We do not know whether he'll work on Saturday and Sunday, so there may be a delay. And so we all need to work quickly to ensure that services continue, inshallah.
Yeah, so jazakallah khair to all our listeners. Just in the last couple of seconds, I'm just going to say you've been listening to Sabiha for the Support When You Lose a Loved One show. And on my show, there was Brother Suleiman Nagdi from Ambikos in the Muslim Burial Council in Leicestershire. And I also had a sister, Safiya, from the Muslim Bereavement Service. And if you go